This will be a demonstration of the Quickdraw weaving program's color palette controls. I have two different ways to get to the color palette control. From the project setup screen, I can ask for palette, go to more, or if I'm editing the pattern, and warp or weft editor both give me the palette controls. If I ask for more, I get to the same place. Now at this point I can add a color. For example, I'll pull a red up. If I don't want that one, I can delete that color. If I want to add a full range of color, it'll take that whole suite. So I now have an assortment of reds in the pattern for me. Clear palette gets rid of everything except for the black and white. I can select a background of anything I want, so I can drag any of the colors there to background. Most of the time that's a little hard to read, so I'll change it back to a gray. Shrink palette I'll talk about in a little bit. So I can also drag all the colors. I can pull any or all of the colors off a 12-color color wheel. I can pull the 6 primary colors. I also have access to a 36-color color wheel with various hues and tones, so I can pull those in where I want to. Now I have an ability of creating a number of custom colors any way I want to. Let me go to an orange. It shows me the usual red, green, blue RGB color components. I can adjust those any way I want to in small or large increments. I can select the box, type in, it will go what I want. The other thing that's also provided is red, yellow, blue components. This is not an exact, but it does make it a little bit easier. If I want an orange with a little less yellow in it or a little bit more red, I can click those guys and move that around there. I also have an ability from a color selected, if I want to pull in tones, I can pull in one tone, for example. Let me clear the delete color. I can also select a range of tones, for example, the mid tan here and a little bit darker color, the center color. You'll notice the little tabs on these lines mark where the center color is on those tonal ranges, and add that. So I now have some colors to play with. I'm just throwing a rainbow, so I've got a range of colors. Now when I go back in to edit the shafts, I can, for example, if I want to throw in red and yellow threads, I now have a series of colors in the shaft. If I now go back to the color palette and I ask for a shrink palette, it's going to look through that, figure out exactly which of those colors are actually used in the pattern I'm now playing with, and compress all of the other excess nonsense that I've inadvertently created into the program. And that gives me a pretty good description of the color capabilities. Thank you now. This is an update to the color palette controls. In this case, let me start from the 4-color pattern that we were playing with. If I go back in and I go to the color palette, what I've added is a grayscale functions here. So as I select the colors, I can actually see the grayscale component change, which show the larger the number, the brighter the color. The other thing this can also do is when I hit the grayscale button, it's replaced each of the colors in the palette with its grayscale equivalent. And for reference, let me add the rainbow again. So the color sequence was red, so the red's pretty dark. The orange, the yellow is pretty bright to the eye. The green, blue is pretty dark for the human eye response. And the purple's a little bit brighter. So that would then allow me to take that grayscale value. When I say done, it's now flattened the colors on that, so I can physically go back through, look for contrast, and make sure that my color choices are appropriate. And that is what the color update does. Thank you. This will be an update to the Quickdraw weaving program's color palette controls. In this particular case, what I've added is the function to copy palette as paste and merge the palette. Now the two samples I have here, the one on the left is the standard palette I use, which is a black, white, plus the 6 rainbow colors. And the palette on the right here is one that I downloaded that Judy Ito had put onto the Facebook weaving software group that has the Lunatic Fringe palette. And now I have had the capability of copying individual colors. For example, that brown, if I add it, I can copy color by color to add, replace, do whatever I want to in a normal manner, but what I added was the ability to copy the whole palette and paste that whole palette. In this case, what I just did was to paste, and it deleted the colors I had, replaced them directly with the palette, so it's exactly the same. Or if the other thing what I'd wanted to do was keep my palette and then add those new colors, I can hit the merge palette, in which case it's looked through, like the black and white were already in the palette, so it didn't need to add extra copies of those. So I've now got a merged palette, which is all of those. I can now use those in any manner I want to. And that is the full color palette controls. Thank you. This will be an update talking about the latest function and the ability to add an identifier, i.e. the color name, vendor, identification number, whatever, with each color in the palette. In particular, I've added the identifier string down here, which you can type in. For example, I've selected a red thread there. If I type in RED, I can now, when I drag that back to the red thread, or select an orange thread, if I take the orange, I can then drag that back to orange. And whenever I select one of the thread names, it will tell me whatever name it has. And now the other thing I've also added, and let me look at these here a second, is the Broussard full cotton ID, and I've added those names, so you'll notice the identifier box down here in this window. So for each color in the color palette, it will show me that colors as well as the identifier name. Same thing is going on. I've added the Lunatic Fringe tubular spectrum. So for each color there, the manufacturer's nomenclature there. And as I drag a pattern, say for example, I want to drag the yellow from here and add that over here, it's now dragged that into this pattern with that ID. Okay, now what this actually does is adds a new field to the WIF file that has that string of IDs. There's a possibility that might not peacefully coexist with other weaving software. So the Purge ID button here, if you click it, it has now deleted all of the identifier names, so it should ensure any backwards compatibility if necessary. So that's the ability to add identifiers and to delete them. Now I'm going to do a completely separate video talking about how to use the palettes as well as how to create the palettes. So that's the detail I'm going to give you here. Thank you. Bye.